I kind of look at my career as there's chapters to it, right? And there was this grinding, proving chapter where I don't think any of that was true. It was exceptionally an egoic effort, right? Seeking approval, seeking self value through my actions, through my skills, through my craft. That's a very common, let's call it 20 to 30s chapter of life, right? Where I feel like there's a lot less consciousness and a lot of freaking sweat, man, and a lot of aggression. And is that testosterone at play? Is that ego at play? Yes, all those things. But I think the knowledge, the depth of understanding of the menu, the impact, the ingredient, all those things, they accumulate with mastery. You know, the nuance of how you treat a carrot, very egoic when I was 22. It was like, how many fucking things can I make this carrot do? And then, like by the time I was 42, I was just enamored and just totally enchanted with the molecular interaction between fungal and bacterial relationships in soil and how they allow for nutrient bioavailability in that carrot because of soil, because of last year's cover crops, because of rainfall in April, type of a thing, So it's like, I think that you have to strip away the proving of chefdom, which kind of we all start there. And I started as a dishwasher, and then it was like I literally just got thrown on the cook line one day and just fell in love with the intensity of the environment, no understanding of how food behaved in heat, right? But I had a deep understanding of, oh my God, my intensity is finally welcome in this environment, from a kid that's been getting put in the freaking hallway his whole life to then all of a sudden there was an environment that was so intense. We need you right now. And it was like, oh my God, I'm full, like in this moment. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like, I don't know if I answered your question other than saying my ignorance in the beginning of my pursuit has been kind of the most beautiful part of the journey. And these constant unravelings.
Yeah, I actually think you added another layer to that is that not only do you understand the ingredients, right? You're even going back to like, do I belong? Like, am I worthy of the position? And it's interesting is that I'm guessing that 20s and 30s, right, where you were like, I'm just going to show like I am like the best like cook and I can like do so many things like with that like carrot was you're doing it externally, but truly at the end of the day, you actually were really trying to just prove it to yourself. I mean, is that fair? If you when you look back, like you were trying to get the external validation when the only person you needed to convince was yourself.
Yes, I'll give you that. I will also give you the pursuit of mentorship.
Ooh, yeah, tell me.
And I think there's a level of proving that then gets stripped away and allows for a level of learning, right? And I remember the moment that kind of happened for me. I cooked for a lot of restaurants. I was very challenged young man, had a lot of bullshit in my past. Uh, and I was just kind of like, okay, every time I get fired, I'm not coming home till I have a better job. Right. And I would just like do that. I would grind at a restaurant till I told the chef to go fuck himself. And then I would like, or whatever happened. It was always some explosive moment, right? Like you see me, right? Very few things have happened in my life. But in that pursuit, there was this moment where I was going to a culinary program at the local community college. I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. I knew I wanted to be a chef, and I was working at the Sanssouci in the Renaissance Hotel in downtown Cleveland, Terminal Tower. And this chef, like, he was like, "Hey, you should really think about taking the advanced standing test for Johnson and Wales." He's like, "You could do your entire 2-year degree in 12 months. You already know your knife skills, your mother sauces. Like, you're banging on the line. Like, dude, you can do this. You could save yourself 17 grand and like just bang it out." And I was like, nah, nah, nah. And I kind of like always knew better than this dude in my mind.
Yep.
And then he let me run this special. I know the dish specifically, dude. Lobster tortellone with seared grapes and sweet peas, mascarpone cream in the middle of the tortellone, handmade pasta, and I ran it as a special and it killed. And he's like, "I want you to put it on Valentine's Day menu. And I was like, yes, like I'd never gotten this opportunity before. And it skunked so hard. Like the prep of this dish followed me for like weeks in the freezer of like trying to get these handmade lobster tortellone sold because no one bought it like on the menu. And I was like, it was such a perfect stripping away of confidence, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it was I see you ego and I'll raise you one.
Yeah, very much so. So then Ben, his name was Ben too, Chef Ben Fambro, amazing dude. Um,
Of course.
yeah, right. But he was a very meticulous, organized, French trained classical chef, right? I was a wild harvesting shit out of the woods on the fringes of what should and shouldn't be eaten chef, right? Just pushing envelopes constantly. And one day I showed up for work and he's like, "Hey, you have an appointment." It was after I failed at this thing. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Yeah, there's somebody here for you in the lobby." And he arranged it. It was the Johnson and Wales admissions rep. And she was just like, "Here's your advanced standing test, zero studying, zero like." And I was like, "Oh, how long do I have to take it?" And she was like, 2 hours. I was like, "Now?" And the so I literally took this test in the lobby of the hotel on the clock, like unbeknownst to me. And I nailed it and I got in and like graduated top 10 of my class, won the national cooking competition, went to Australia with a French master chef for 2.5 months, cooked for dignitaries, ate with Aboriginals. Like it was life altering moment. And that's why I say, like, I kind of will like take you of like, yes, there's the 20s to 30s proving phase, but then there's the moment you become aware you need a mentor. It's like I proved to this dude I can outwork people. I proved to this dude I am dedicated enough to come in and hand make pasta, right? And now I accept that he saw that failure as an opportunity for me to get out of my own way. But I wouldn't have chosen it because I still had so much ego at play.
Yeah. So what would you tell people who are maybe they don't even have to be in their 20s and 30s, right? Because I think that sometimes people get stuck in that same ego thing into their 50s. What would you tell someone who maybe is the like, you know what, they've reached a certain level of success, right? Because hard work, grit, aggressiveness, I mean, that will get you like pretty far, right? But it doesn't actually get you, I think, into the sweet spot, like where you were talking about, like from a carrot to like being fascinated with the terroir, right? Of like where it came from and like the farming, the technique and the regenerative like nature and like the animals that like were used to fertilize, that spot. And I think that that's what I call like the joy moment where, it's like the Dan Martell quote, it looks, feels like play, looks like work, right? In that sweet spot. What would you tell someone about how to get out of the ego? I mean, is there like a top 2, 3 structure? And then more importantly, you hear often on Instagram, on LinkedIn, go find a mentor, go find a mentor, go find a mentor, which is really glib and it's really good. But I think it's actually easier said than done, in part because how do you ask? How do you actually find a mentor and how do you actually get a mentor to accept you? So I'd love for you to talk about like what would you tell someone who maybe has reached that sort of they've grounded out so much that they're exhausted and two, how do they get out of it? And how do they find that mentor that allows them to get into that?
Well, I would start with the latter and say when the teacher is ready, this or when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I think that happens a lot. It's very common kind of thing in the martial arts community of like, when do you, oh, Sifu, when do I know I need to move on to the next teacher, right? It's like, when you're ready, you know? And then, of course, the inevitable green as hell follow up is, well, how do I know when I'm ready? You know what I mean? It's like, so I think that is a huge part of it. The pursuit of a mentor is less important than the welcoming of a mentor. And I think that was my Ben Fambro moment, right? I was not seeking him as a mentor. He just allowed me to fail and then teed me up for my next big hill. And rest assured, he was the first person that I called when I got out of culinary school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not only with gratitude, but dude, you got a place for me on the line. The answer was no. Actually, the answer was yes with shitty pay, but um, it's the same. Yeah, I'm not doing that. But point being is, I accepted him. I did not ask him. That was a moment I would not have asked for. So the thing that I would say to someone that's stuck behind an ego is actually not a statement, it's a question. And that question would be, how's that working out? You know, and I'll give you a little bit of a kind of abstract tangent level story here, but I think it's incredibly important. It's a very recent discovery for myself. I did a psychedelic journey with a men's group a couple weeks ago, which I'd never done before. I've done some group work. I've done a lot of individual work. I've done therapeutic shamanic work, but I'd never done like a group of 8 dudes, you know, and it's huge trust fall for me, mostly because of my own kind of like self-critique, the mania of ADHD of like, oh, am I good enough? Do I deserve to be in this room? Do I have enough money? Blah, blah, blah. Right. All these things. And I realized at the end of it, we were doing this decompression and just kind of we call it the integration session, you know, at the very end, do a tobacco ceremony, ground out, share our breakthroughs. And I just kind of told the guys, I was like, you know, I realized that I had deep, deep, deep insecurities around other males, especially successful males, that I was bringing from my past into my present. Being a late bloomer, kind of a like odd kid, just I brought that with me of like not being able to orient to successful people in a young age. And then I started through EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, you know, I've been a member for 10 years now. I started to hang around with millionaires all the time, you know, through like these very successful entrepreneurs that guess what are still a flaming hot mess. And that I started to find this commonality, but I would still find myself in these conversations about index funds, golf games, sports, my boat, shit that I don't care about. And meanwhile, I'm like barefoot out on the farm harvesting asparagus at dawn, listening to the, you know, spring migration birds. And my advisor is like, what are you doing wasting your time and life doing this? And it dawned on me. And I told these guys, I was like, dude, I understand that now. I've been avoiding opening myself up to successful male figures because I don't measure success in the same way. And they're measuring success through wealth a lot of times. And I'm measuring success with my integration with the earth and my family and my ability to challenge people to and inspire them to get out of their own way and arrive at their infinite potential. And I don't really care how much money I make doing that. And it was a story. It was a narrative from being a caterer in incredibly wealthy homes for the last 25 years. I had convinced myself that I was the help. And then my son started going to this incredibly affluent school, and the parents were seeing me in the hallway and kind of like giving me this look like, is there an event tonight? Like, and I would have to like break down that barrier again. And now no, our kids are classmates now. You know, I've scaled my company to the place where now I can afford to go send my kids to the school that you know, that my clients' children go to. And the amount of gratitude I got back from these other guys of trusting that environment to say that level of thing was like, I seriously considered it one of the more powerful breakthroughs of my last 5 years since COVID, of like being able to see that, vocalize it, and then get a fucking hug. you you know, was like, I don't know. There's a lot of territory there, man.
There is. You know, I love that you're bringing up this idea of like masculine energy. And I think so often between movies, social media, there's a level of like what it actually should be. And I think at the basis that like true masculinity from my perspective, it actually is born and like birthed out of love. Like that's actually where the strength. I was had an episode earlier that I was recording. We were talking about in the green room, we're talking about like, hey, when men and women are looking at each other, like biologically, like what is the thing that tracks them? Whether it's like 95% of all decisions happen subconsciously, right? So a lot of things we aren't even aware of. And we're talking about that oftentimes that when you're looking for a mate at a very basic level, right? You're looking for someone uh, who can protect and maybe provide prosperity. But notice none of those were about like who looks the coolest, who's got the biggest boat, right? Those are all born out of a place of love, right? Who can protect, right? What are we protecting? You're protecting like the home, kids, right? Who can provide. And just to be clear, in this day and age, right, that happens both sides. So I just want to be really, really clear when I'm stating that this is not a singularity to just masculine energy, especially now today anymore. But I love that you are bringing this back to that um, that masculine energy is actually being able to show vulnerability, to actually show emotion.
Absolutely. It's also like deeply about vibration, you know? Whatever we're resonating with, we attract. Like sticks to like, man. You wake up in a shitty mood, you're going to have a shitty day if you keep it going. In fact, this morning I woke up, I read a story yesterday about an ice raid in a restaurant called Buena Faqueta in San Diego, where my sister and brother-in-law and kids live. Um, 15 armed agents storm a book to the gills busy restaurant on a Friday night to like shake down for illegals. The group of people in the dining room shamed them out of the building and then surrounded the van and were like, shame, 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 get out of our neighborhood, right? And then the ICE agents deployed stun grenades and flashbangs on the people, the guests of the restaurant. I was so overwhelmed by my frustration around that, not only of being a food and beverage proprietor, a United States Marine, an American, fifth generation military service, and I, I was just overwhelmed with this feeling of like the unravelings of the protections of our society that we hold so dear. And Jackie, my wife, asked me, she's like, why would someone do that? And I said, to stoke fear. Like it's classic psychological warfare. Point being, I had a couple meetings this morning. I felt myself just like sucked into this crappy disposition. And I kind of did the work of like Bebenroth, awareness. You are in drill instructor mode right now. I need to consciously pull some levers, exercise, cold shower, meditation. I had to show up for an employee that deeply needed me today at 1 o'clock. I needed to show up for a leader that needed me at 2 o'clock. And I needed to show up for you at 3 o'clock with a full cup, you know? And so having that awareness of, I'm doing it. I'm vibing at a low frequency. This is not the evangelist of the brand of Ben of Spice, right? That the world wants to engage with. This is a very small, dense, anxiety ridden version of yourself. And it's all about choosing your next moment, you know? And so I say that because it becomes about awareness, acceptance, and action. And the space between awareness and acceptance is actually very large, but the space between acceptance and action is very, very quick. And so I have to go through this regular diagnostic check of Ben. Where are we at? Are we emotionally ready for the next moment that needs you to show up full? Right.
That's amazing. I've never heard it really articulated that way. Yeah, awareness, acceptance, action. Uh, Talk about why is there such a gap between the awareness and acceptance?
Oh, dude, it's where we often find acceptance is in a horribly destitute moment, hospital, doctor's office, whatever. You're aware that smoking is bad for your health until you hear the words lung cancer. You have not accepted the fact that you need to change, bro. Like, and then that step is fast. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But getting from here to there, you've known this for 20 years, you know? And then all of a sudden, 20 days later, boom, I'm a non smoker.
Well, I think I think that's incredible. Where for you did you actually have your like awareness and acceptance moment, right? Because clearly, like you know these things because you've actually done the work, but you obviously had the moment. Obviously, like thankfully it wasn't lung cancer, but you had something else, right? Happen that forced you into that. Do you mind sharing? Like, where was your turning point where you like were like, "Hey, I need this to be in my life"?
One of the earlier moments, uh, I went to 3 high schools, got chucked out of public school for drug use, checked out of boarding school for drug use, thrown into military school for my senior year, pulled myself off Ritalin, which I had been on since I was 9 years old, sold it to all the kids in the barracks. Entrepreneurial spirit coming out. You know, I got home from military school, obviously being around all boys, I was seeking one thing, found it, got a girl pregnant at 18. I was fulfilling this story of basically like, you're going to fuck up your life, Ben. And I was like reading myself that script. You know what I mean? And this is where, the childhood trauma that I did unpack during COVID was definitely the impetus for all these behaviors. But regardless, these behaviors were yielding experiences, right? Fist fights, metal band screaming, you name it, until the pregnancy of my ex-girlfriend, months after we had broken up, hit me on a phone call that I received, and I'm on a wall phone, as I would tell my kids, and I'm looking at my parents eating dinner, and I'm getting this news in one ear, and I just like almost passed out. And I ran away from home, and I ran to my friend's apartment in Toledo, which is now my wife. And I ran to Jackie's apartment. She was a friend at the time, and I just didn't know what to do. And I didn't have any tether. Now I can see it. I was totally cut off from the sacred feminine energy. My mom was like, "You better not," right? And then my girlfriend's like, "You better." And like all these, I had no tether to like tenderness, acceptance, right? I was just aggression and like counter culture. And I ran to Jackie's house. And after, kind of being a mess there for a couple months, I was kicking around some military service, and I was laying with her one night and I said, "I think I'm going to join the military. Would you go with me?" And she said, "Yes." She's like, "Yeah, I would do that." And I was like, "Oh my God, someone believes in me." You
Wow.
know? That was like, there was so many of those moments though, looking backwards, you know, but that one was like, I was at the bottom. I had no money, no job, no hope, like child support coming in, like all this stuff. And my parents were so disappointed because they worked so hard from when I was a kid figuring out why I couldn't do homework or chose not to do homework. Uh, to like all the way, it wasn't until when Jackie said that, then I was like, I'm doing it, kicked around all the services, decided to go Marine Corps. And then all of a sudden my dad was proud of me. And I was like, oh my God, like it's happening, you know? It was all in the proving stage, but it was unraveling the narrative that I wasn't good enough to achieve in life.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. So then so Jackie then joined the Marines with you.
No, she absolutely did not. And she didn't even move with me.
Oh.
It was the moment that she said yes.
That is that's amazing. Well, you keep talking about like traumas, and I think that so often, especially in this day and age, there's a lot of conversation around like how to avoid trauma, like avoid it. Like if you do these things, this is how you avoid it. And but I got to tell you, in my experience, it's in the trauma is actually where the real seeds are actually not only planted, but there's enough heat. Like it's like a forest fire out west that like provides enough heat that it actually allows a seed to germinate because it forces you to move from indecision to decision, right? And I'm really curious about how trauma has played in your life, right? Because you and I were talking off screen like I mean, you owned a restaurant. COVID, I mean, there's a lot of restaurants that have not come back. A lot of businesses that have not come back, right? But yet so they could look at that was a trauma, right? You and I were talking a little bit about some of like your what that time and space created for you to actually uncover maybe the real trauma. Would you talk a little bit about how trauma has played an incredible role in your life of actually helping you excavate the real Ben?
First it giveth, then it taketh away. And I think in trauma, it is the opposite. first it taketh away. And it's a matter of how long you allow that to be the state. And then the reverse engineering, the processing, the what does it mean? What do I make it mean is the giveth, right? And sometimes that can be a 30-year gap, right? So I'm going to speak to the restaurant pivot first, and then I want to bring me back to, I think this is a good taking off place from my brother's injury when I was a kid. So you said something that the heat of the fire of a traumatic experience moves you from indecision to decision. I think that's true. And I also think part of that truth is that some of those decisions are made under duress in the middle of the street while taking fire, huddled behind a car. And those aren't necessarily great decisions. And when my brother's in Homeland Security, I kind of had a little bit of the inside scoop on COVID. Just he was on the Kamala Harris Secret Service team at the time and was kind of like not telling me what was happening. He didn't know either, but he was saying, whatever you decide, make sure you can live with it for a year. Because the governor is going to tell you something that he's just taken his best guess. And he said, whatever you decide, just make sure you can live with that decision for a year. And so we decided to permanently close on the first day of lockdown. I was the first restaurant in the continental United States to permanently go out of business. It got me a cover story in the Wall Street Journal. And it was because of that decision, I laid off 39 people. I refunded $350,000 worth of deposits for all of my catering clients for the year, which was a stupid move. I did it out of honor, and I actually didn't need to do that. Which then cash flow paralyzed us, which then I was also under construction on a $2.5 million, 10,000 square foot catering facility at the time, which I had, leveraged my shareholders' money. So I had dirt floors, trenching for where lines were going to be. And then I had this fine dining Uber farm to table restaurant that you just could not put into a box, right? And so we shut down. I had my bookkeeper go to the bank, get $50,000 in cash out of the bank. We cryovac it, put it in 4 different locations around the city, sent every employee home with food, paper goods, soap, masks for 2 weeks worth of living. Like, I really dove into Marine Corps combat training mindset around this, shut down the entire restaurant and cleared it out of every single asset in 8 hours. 8 hours. And after that, we stopped. And my team was like, we run on EOS, so we were still running our L10 meetings. And then L10 went from once a week to twice a week, and then 3 times a week. It actually became a therapy session for my team. They're so busybody minded and now have nowhere to put it. There was a ton of suicide in the food and beverage community, a ton of alcohol poisoning. Like, there's a lot of, we call it the island of misfit toys sometimes, right? What our secret of success in this traumatic moment was, no decisions will be made in a fear state. We are all afraid right now. We are resonating at a very low frequency. We are riddled with anxiety and unknowns. Anything we decide to do would be out of protection alone. And that ain't strategy. That's covering your ass. So our whole thing was kind of in that Marine Corps firefight mindset of like, make no lasting decisions in the middle of the street. Get to cover, reassess, where's it coming from? Somebody get on the roof, right? Like, that type of mindset was the recalibration period. And so that's when I kind of dove into reinvention, leveraged my connections at Nestle to do some research projects. Where should I go from here? What should I do? And that's how I decided to pizza my way out of this shit, basically. And that's when we kind of conceived Boom's Pizza in the name of my grandfather, who was born in the Great Depression, dropped out of high school to join the Army Air Corps, was a radio operator on medevac planes for all of World War II, saw more death and dying than you could ever imagine. And then, and then when he died, the family had $1 million in First Energy stock that no one knew about. Him and my grandmother raised 4 kids in a 1,000 square foot home in Parma. Like, I'm like, how did he do that? So that whole born of hard times was like I built a sauna on the farm, and that's where that was my COVID project, and I just thought in there about like what would boom do, and that's kind of how I gained space from having to make a decision, created a safe area to be calm, and then said, at the end of this period of calm, we will then have educated decisions to make that will be well informed by experts, not poorly informed by anxiety.
Yeah. That sauna was your rooftop moment.
That was my rooftop moment. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's amazing to me, I'm curious, how did you know that you're had have the awareness that you were resonating so low? I mean, like, what was it that made you so aware of that? Because there are a lot of other people, right, who allowed the monkey brain aspect, right, to allow that fear, that amygdala hijacking to just, I mean, totally take over. I mean, I've never seen toilet paper. I mean, I should have bought stock in toilet paper companies, right? It's like, but like, what about it at that moment do you remember? I mean, was it the fact of your Marine Corps training that like everything slowed down and you actually realized that that the carnage was actually happening all around and no one else was really fully understanding it? Like, I mean, what was that, Ben?
Yeah, so there's definitely some combat training skills at play in there. Lifelong martial artist, so breath control on the jujitsu mat is like when your partner's huffing and puffing, you're just like, got you. Well, I'm just waiting for one stupid move and you're about to make it. I know you're going to make it. You know what I mean? Like, so like that kind of like I could sort of see it in my own eyes. You know what I mean? And the idea around one of my journal entries from COVID was about how I felt like the rest of the world was watching us trip over our own dicks and not even be able to respond to a basic health crisis, and how primed for attack we were. And like that our enemies are watching from the bushes, right? Like classical Marine Corps attack strategy is like, we got 50 dudes, you got 50 dudes. I'm going to send 3 dudes into the night. I'm going to light up your guard post with 100 rounds, and then they're going to shut down and disappear, the old shoot and scoot. And then we're all going to sit in the dark and watch what you do. I bet they don't even know how to respond. You know, like that kind of mindset of like, just give them a little crisis to deal with and let's see what they do with it. Ooh, I didn't think they were going to run left. That was kind of smart. Flank them. You know what I mean? Like, but without the space between the shoot and the scoot and then the calm observation, otherwise, dude, you're just getting into a firefight in the dark. You're both going down. You know what I mean? So that's where I kind of like pulled that out, was like EO taught me a lot of emotional awareness in the 6 year or 5 years prior to the pandemic. But I think a lifetime in martial arts and then military was like, uh, there's opportunity in every crisis. You know what I mean? Well, let no good crisis go unutilized. In order to utilize the crisis, you have to remove yourself from it.
Yeah. I'm curious. You obviously knew the food world and you did catering. How did that transition though to pizza? I mean, what about that? I mean, you could have done funnel cakes for God's sakes. Like you could have done like hot dogs. You could have done food trucks like of tacos. And I mean, why pizza? Because obviously you saw in terms of the shoot, and then there's scoot, and then there's the quietness, and you were already plotting your next move. Why pizza?
Well, couple layers. Number one, I spent 8 years working 100 hours a week to lose 100 grand a year in a fine dining restaurant. And I was running a farm that was feeding that fine dining restaurant. I was literally doing chicken chores at 1 o'clock in the morning after coming through, right? 350 chickens, 16 hogs, $150,000 a year in produce being grown on our farm in the Cuyahoga Valley. So my service staff was spending 10 minutes at your table explaining why the turnips exist, right? That dining time was long. It was transformational experience. It was not transactionally beneficial, right? So for a 38.50 dining a check average and a 2.5 hour dining time, you ain't making money, right? Unless those people have 3 drinks, and now you're actually endangering the world. So, number one, sell what sells, right? I was no longer comfortable pulling my family's income off of how much alcohol can I get into these people. Just didn't feel right. Um, so when I dove into a research project with my friend over COVID, I was like, well, first let's do a landscape study of where is all the food purchased outside of the home in the continental United States on an annual average. So we did a whole spread: tacos, burgers, fried chicken, whatever it is, ramen. The largest category was pizza. 9.75% of all dining dollars spent outside of the home are on pizza. It's the largest category in the country. So we're in COVID, we're watching delivery only, happen and all this. And what I really became aware of was the 1918 Spanish flu. And I started drawing parallels around Ray Dalio actually informed me with the inception of the 80-year cycle of suffering, right? And I'm like, okay, this is a global health event. Most certainly, resource acquisition and destabilization of global trade and conflict will result from this, right? Economic fallout will most certainly be on the heels of that. So I needed to develop something that was recession proof instead of I see you once a year for your anniversary or your birthday, and I try to get as much money out of you as possible, right? So those three things are why I was like, I can leverage my insane level of ingredient awareness to dough. Once you engineer a great dough, dude, it's the canvas. And then it's scalable because now it's all process based. So that's kind of where I was rewriting the menu almost every week. You know what I mean? Like, and I mean a lot of dishes, man. Putting so much creative energy into ferments, pickle it, powder it, whatever we can do. Like anything that failed on the farm, we would find a way to make vinegar out of it. Basically that kind of stuff. So all of that energy spent towards culinary creativity, and then get to the end of the year and you have no money in the bank, but you're everybody's favorite restaurant. Number one, I was finally able to close Spice Kitchen and Bar while keeping Spice Catering Company alive and well, and our nonprofit Spice Field Kitchen and our farm Spice Acres. But I could evaporate the restaurant without shame. And that was it. I couldn't do it without this moment because everyone was like, it's the best, Ben. And you're winning awards all the time and all this shit. And I'm like, dude, I'm dying here. But you can't say that on the dining room floor at somebody's 30th anniversary party. Like, so there was a lot there, man. I had to set the ego aside. I was like, okay, I got out of this shame without shame. I made a decision that my investors believed in me. I tried to convince my investors to sell the building I'm sitting in right now. I was like, dude, it's not a restaurant yet. Just sell it. I'll figure out what to do with my life. And they slid me $1.5 million check and they said, we believe in you. You'll figure it out. Zero revenue company at the time.
Yeah, and not only that, but you gotta think about the environment at that time. I mean, it was so uncertainty. Is this when we're gonna open? Is this when we're gonna open? Or what state's gonna do what? Is this like how's this supposed to go? Right? I mean, it was like the Wild West, the blind leading the blind. That's incredible. That's incredible. One of the things you talked about before we pivot back to your brother's injury, but you talked about shame. I'm I love that you referenced that you were like, I could shut this down without shame. Talk to me about that. Because I think shame is something that is lurking behind every window and door that we either have to open or close.
And we have to open and close all of them,
Yep.
right? We have to.
Yep. Have to.
And even if it's not until your deathbed moment, you will open and close every door. I can assure you. You know, um, regret, dude. It's at the heart of it. And shame is the main architect of regret. I feel shameful that I didn't, right? Or whatever. You hip to Daniel Pink, the Powers of Regret, amazing man, amazing presenter. Saw him at an EOGLC, but that was resonating with me. And my board of advisors and my shareholders they've been seeing the negative returns on the restaurant for 8 years, you know what I mean? We owned the building, we had the catering company was being more successful, it was like it would make enough money to offset the losses, and they were always just challenging me more and more and more to become more of a businessman. So I went to 10,000 small businesses, kinda got schooled in that, right? And then I joined EO and started to really get schooled in vulnerability. And it became this thing mostly of people in my forum that I had already prejudged because they walked into the first meeting dripping in diamonds. And I'm immediately like, what do these fucking people know about suffering and hard work? Right. And turns out a hell of a lot more than you, dude. Like, like that was what I learned over the period of those years. And getting out from behind that judgment and getting out from behind that resentment and regret of what I didn't do in time to make this work, the shame, the cycle of shame started to dissolve itself because I knew that my advisors had been challenging me to do this very thing. I'll tell you a really brief story about this. I had this mentor. My first mentor was Rick Duty, amazing guy. Very talented operator. He owned Brio Bravo. Took it public, right? Started as a little thing. Grew up in his parents' restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, Lindy's. Like just eat and breathe the industry. And I went and I met with him as a mentor, and I was his mentee. And on my first meeting with him, he sat me down. He said, um, "I went to your restaurant. I think your bread service is arrogant." And I was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Well, you obviously don't understand what we're trying to do." And he's like, "What are you trying to do?" And I said, "Well, I got those grains from a farmer, down in the middle of Ohio, and they were milled at Mud Run, and then we ferment and our sour and this and that and the whipped lardo and all the things." And he was like, "Ben, who bakes the best bread in Cleveland?" And I said, "On the Rice, hands down." And he said, "Then fucking buy it and sell it. Your bread service is arrogant because you think people care more about all those stories than they do about a quality piece of bread." And I was like, "Dude, I don't know if this is going to work." And he's like, "It is going to work if you choose to make it work." And he's like, "Here's what I would do if I were you. You're in the wrong location. You're on a poor corner. If I were you, I would close down your restaurant tomorrow. I would reopen it as Ben's Burger and Bourbon Bar. And then I would take your Spice Kitchen and Bar concept, move it over to Chagrin Falls on the east side of Cleveland where people have money, reopen it. You'll make $1 million in 2 years." And the dude was right. But I was not ready for that teacher to appear. So I stopped the relationship because I couldn't handle it. I was like, "Dude, this is my life's work." But he told me in 2014 what took me 6 years to finally learn. The message was there. It was waiting for me to accept it. I had awareness of how hard this was, of how little money we make, of how much I'm grinding my culinary team into dust, you know what I mean? Just so they can be the most creative people in town. And none of them can afford to eat here, and none of them were at their kid's birthday party last year. You know what I mean? Took a long time to realize that lesson was actually what gets me to my statement of running a sustainable farm to table restaurant was the least sustainable thing I've ever done in my life.
Wow. The external projection was not the internal reality.
No, man. And I think that was where a lot of my substance abuse came from. Not only the pain of my bone on bone arthritis in my knee, but I had to drink away that failure. You know what I mean? That I had to drink away that inevitability of failure, of just knowing like there's no way out of this without shame, you know? And it just became arrogance, it became ego, it became a lot of things, dude. So grateful that I made it through with my long lasting relationships, my wife, my family, my kids, everything is intact. Um, man, it was close.
Yeah. I'm curious, and maybe this parlays into talking about your brother's injury, but obviously you had that awareness and acceptance moment, right? With your like you just go like, yep, had to do that. But I don't know where you if you want to take it to bringing it back to your brother's injury, but
Yeah, I can. You know, so I'll tell you that, as I said, like getting into EO, getting vulnerable with my forum, starting to look at my lifeline, right? We would do these lifeline exercises at mini retreat every year when we would bring in a new member. And it was like someone walks behind you, right? And you just, or you do it in person with pictures. You just kind of peel it out. And I started to see this pattern. I'm like, man, I was this happy kid. And then all pictures disappear. Hmm, weird. Then I had COVID and I was at my parents' house quarantining. And like I realized that there was no pictures of me on the walls in their bedroom. And I was like, except for like when I was a young kid, it was like my sister and my brother graduating from the Citadel and being an air marshal and all this stuff. And like my brother-in-law being a Navy pilot. And it was like this gap. And it's really kicked off my curiosity of like, dude, how did I end up this person? Why is there this gap in people's record of my life? And then it became very obvious to me. I did my first psychedelic journey with a friend of mine, one of my forum mates. I did 125 milligrams of MDMA and then 2.5 grams of psilocin, the synthetic psilocybin. And I went through the whole journey and I'm very familiar with drugs in my system. So I'm just having a good time with it, right? Telling jokes, fucking around, and like, my friend was like, I feel you fighting this. And I was like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I'm just a warrior by nature. And then this ambulance drove past the hotel as I was kind of coming down. And she's like, do you want more medicine? And I was like, no, I think I'm good. And this ambulance drove past. And I said out loud, sitting on the couch, I just said, I hope those people are okay. Dude, snapped me into standing on my parents' mailbox as an 11-year-old boy, waiting for my brother's ambulance. Like, relived this moment. I was chasing my brother with a steak knife. It was his 10th birthday. We were playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he went to kick open the door, and he missed the handle and went through the plate glass and then fell down the steps. And all the glass went up into the back of his thigh. Cut every one of his tendons except for one missed his femoral artery by a 1/4 inch. 1,000 stitches, was never supposed to walk again. I did that. That was a story I told myself, as opposed to that happened, right? So when my dad and my brother left in the ambulance, they never returned in my life. They became this unit, right? My brother lived. And my dad is an amazing human. My parents are amazing. I hold no harm, no shame, no guilt, no nothing. This is just my unraveling, right? My dad was a special ed teacher, swimming coach, first aid, CPR trainer, amazing educator. And he saved my brother's life. They went to the fucking hospital. My brother rehabbed. My dad was like his advocate, got my brother back on his feet. My uncle Ken was a physical therapist, like all the efforts descended upon bringing Brad back, right? This photo of my brother's grenade injury leg would be on the dinner table when friends would come over. Like, we did get a Nintendo out of the deal, though. I will say, because we're not allowed to have video games. And then my neighbor was like, hey, maybe a Nintendo's a good thing. But point being, I never saw myself disappear into my bedroom and cry into my body pillow and really wrestle with the fact that I almost killed the only thing I really loved, which was my brother, was my best friend. We were 18 months apart. We just, every moment of every day, Ben and Brad, you know? And I realized in that moment, that's when I started to orient with kids that their parents were going through divorces or they had abuse in the house or alcoholism. And I started skateboarding and getting into really heavy music and car, I start tattooing myself, like, and I started injuring myself in skateboarding accidents and stuff. And it all became clear to me of like, oh my God, I was so afraid and alone that I was seeking other people that could orient and understand that feeling of being afraid and alone because no one in my house felt it. And dude, that was a revolutionary moment for me of like, oh my God, that's when it all went sideways. And it didn't go sideways per se. It just went that direction and now gives me this sort of opportunity, this almost superpower of my emotional intelligence, my ADHD. I don't have attention deficit. I have attention abundance. I see everything, you know? And being told that I couldn't pay attention when I'm actually watching you, the teacher, having trouble. Your emotional state is actually overwhelming my ability to absorb math. Right? I mean, like, I'm getting it all, you know? But that experience, my wife was very concerned about me after this breakthrough. Dude, I had been basically a pain addict ever since that moment when I was 11 years old. And this was unraveled for me April of 2021, right? So let's call it 30 years of living inside of this narrative. And then my Chef Ben identity came up of like, oh my God, all the proving, the seeking love, all of the stuff, right? The inability to love myself and only ability to experience enoughness from the dining room, you know? You know, I did this meditation a couple days, and I actually just recorded a great big talks with this guy Thomas Fox up here, and I told this story. The theme was echo, and my echo was this moment. And the echo, the words in my mind for 30 years were the words, "Get dad." And those are the last words my brother said to me from the ground, holding his leg. "Get dad," you know? And I saw the single drop of blood hit the thing, and then the fat cells come out and just land on the steps. And I went in the next day, I was doing my meditation after my journey. I still had the medicine kind of running through my system. It's very early in the morning. I had spent basically the last 12 hours crying. And I did this meditation where inside of my meditation, I saw my brother. I saw the moment. He says, "Get dad." And I actually go inside of his room. I travel past his fat cells, past the cut tendons, into his femoral artery, up his femoral artery, into his heart, exchange blood with his heart, into his lungs, emerge from his lungs as the words "Get dad." And now I am the words "Get dad." And they enter into me as the first moment that I was aware that this was not my fault. It was one of the most pivotal moments of my life. And like the flood of forgiveness, Jackie really encouraged me to seek some professional help because I was dealing with some seriously deep shit. Um, and I just launched into calling my brother and my dad and just like telling them, like, I have no ill will. Like, this is not your fault. I just have to own this. And my brother was like, holy fuck, I never knew this even affected you. And I was like, dude, me neither. Like, everyone was just wondering what was wrong with Ben. You know what I mean? And he actually ends up telling me my brother went on to graduate from the Citadel, through hike the Appalachian Trail, become a federal air marshal. He's an absolute freaking stud, become a Secret Service agent, special select commit, he's like, dude, that moment defined me physically. For him, that moment was his leaping off phase of physical dominance. I will meet this challenge. I will hike this trail. I will be Summerall Guard at the Citadel. He's like, all of that came from that. And I was like, holy shit, dude. And now I'm starting to see my next chapter past the proving chapter of Chef Ben. My next chapter is in speaking this truth, is in emotional resilience, is in vulnerability and diving deep into these things that happen for you, not to you. And that's why you said, like, I said that first it taketh and then it giveth, right? Like now I'm like, thank God I am able to see this moment through this lens that I can show up for others now with confidence, compassion, and calm, as opposed to mandates and demand, right? Like, and aggression and you better or and threats. That's the old me operating from a place of scarcity and fear.
In a lot of ways, no accident. And we're not having this conversation about this incredible sense of awareness, this incredible sense of of empathy and forgiveness and transformation and catalyzing these what others would consider like trauma, like none of that, right? I think I that is I'm convinced more than ever that when you're in the arena and you have a moment like this, let's bring it back to farming terms. Like it used to be in farming, like you do a crop rotation and then you let the field go fallow. And sometimes like a field, if it's not producing, you have to let it go fallow for a long time for it to actually to heal. And this was just yours. Like your brother Brad just had his field just went it defined him, right? Like you're never gonna be able to walk again. He's like, watch me. And for you, it was this world of hurt that you just were a strong warrior that literally you were not ready to accept the universe's mentorship.
Even, dude, I tore my ACL when I was 15 years old snowboarding. And my folks didn't take me to the doctor, right? They didn't know how bad it was, whatever. So by the time I was trying to get in the Marine Corps at 18, I had to have my ACL repaired to get in. They opened me up. They're like, oh my God, dude, you already have arthritis, right? And I let that mean a whole bunch of shit to me. You know what I mean? In and along the lines of the story of neglect and all that stuff. And what I really came to conclusion was all the wiped out ankles, all the bloody knuckles from punching off the punching bag, all the knee injuries, all that shit. I was trying to show my parents that I too was in enough pain to be worthy of love. Not just Brad, because he's in a wheelchair and you can see it. And obviously he needs love. Right. I just missed the window. And my awareness and my acceptance was all I really needed was my parents to sit me down and say, this wasn't your fault. We still love you and everything's going to be okay. They didn't have the emotional language to do that. They grew up in PTSD households from World War II, man. They were doing the best they could with two ADHD boys going crazy all the time. It was not our first incident, rest assured.
I mean, you guys must have had some speed. I mean, to literally put a leg through.
We were moving. Reckless abandon was our modus operandi, my friend. So it just, and then that informed my parenting. You know what I mean? And I discovered that as I had kids basically in lockdown at the ripe age of 12 and 14, or whatever, 11 and 13. And it was like, oh, now how am I going to parent my kids going into their teenage years? Drastically shaped by this moment.
I'm struck with the fact that there's all these narratives going on. There's the ones like you saw with the EO, right? Walking in, well, like these son of a bitches, like what do they know about suffering, right? Because it's just like you just read the book, right? But you actually open up the cover and actually read the like internal flap, right? And then the flip side is that like you have your parents, right, who are just trying to survive and exist in the moment that they're existing in, right? And they have this horrible, like this, what for them feels like this horrible thing happen. And then you are walking through your own like journey, right? Which everyone just assumes that the narrative is like, well, Ben's just a fuck up.
Totally. And to be honest, that was true. Ben was making choices to fulfill that story of being a fuck up. Yes, Ben was making those choices.
Yeah, because that's the story you're telling yourself.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't think I had any other choice.
What would you tell people now when right? There's an underlying operating system, right? I just said earlier that 95% of all decisions that you make all happen subconsciously. Like we think that we're aware, but let's just face it, like 95% of the things that are like the code and the programs running, we're not even aware of. How would you tell people to either audit or for if you are aware of some underlying narratives that might be maybe triggering some regret or shame or internal judgment? I mean, we all know the things like, well, I could never admit that.
Kind of just handled this last night with my son, Burke. Um, he had a near-death experience last February, ruptured his spleen. I also had a spleen rupture, snowboarding incidents. Same, crazy, crazy, right? But literally, this kid almost died. He lost 50% of his blood February 4th, 2024. Grade 5 spleen laceration, emergency surgery, 7 days in the ICU. And I was laying there with him. And my friend Jason Henkel, who you should have on this podcast, by the way, is an amazing, amazing man. He was like, brother, you don't deserve what's happening to your family right now. And I was like, I want to be really careful with that word deserve, because while it is difficult and while I hope it goes well, I just got to sit next to my son and hold his hand through level 10 pain and teach him how to anchor in the breath in the ICU. I got to tell my son, when you're ready for psychedelic work, this will come back for you. You will relive this moment and you will understand what it was meant to teach you. Right. And this isn't the conversation I was having with him yesterday, actually. The conversation I was having with him was around him getting busted in a lie. Lied to us about going to diving practice. P.S. That spleen rupture happened 2 weeks before state championships. He was about to take first place in the state of Ohio as a freshman. He was a gymnast his whole life. Had a lot of collarbone fractures as a steel plate. So this happened right before that. We had a powder trip to Utah scheduled right after states. Then he was going to be pitching on the mound for, baseball. Whole identity evaporated in a moment. Gone. All of it. Right. And I just watched it happen while dying. And what I told him, he didn't go to diving practice since for a couple months. And he's been leaving the house every Monday night or Sunday night and then coming home with wet hair. Right. And then we find out he hasn't been going. He's been going to his friend's house to hang out. He's like, well, this and that. And I don't know the guy or the kids or whatever. And I'm just like, dude, let me tell you something. You are now about to be 17 years old this year. He's going outward bound this summer, 22-day high alpine mountaineering course. My whole family has done it. Jackie did it in order to be able to marry into our family. Hilarious group of achievers in the Bebenroths, by the way. Yeah, you can marry him after you've suffered enough, right? It's like, and I told him straight up, I was like, dude, you are no longer going to be accountable to us. What we expect out of you of going to diving practice is because we believe in you. We believe that you should be spending time being challenged by a coach in an environment that's progressive. And someday soon, you're going to be standing on the diving board alone, 0.2 of a point away from podium. You're going to know if you put enough in. You're going to know if you checked out of practice and had this lie going. Fine, pull it over on anybody you want, but there's going to be a moment and you're not going to be able to hide from it. And that's my gift to you, my friend. It's not about whether you win states or not. I couldn't give a shit. It's about whether you fully showed up for yourself. That's all you have. And so that's kind of where I left it. I'm like, are you grounded? Yes, you're grounded. Are you a bad person because you lied? No, everyone lies. But it's learning about when to do it and what it costs. And I'm just kind of mic drop, see you for dinner kind of a guy. You know what I mean?
Well, I love that you're bringing this because it really is about it's not the outcome, right? You hear people say it's not the destination, it's the journey. What they're really trying to say is fall in love with the process. Do your current do your current actions support the outcomes that you're looking for?
Yeah, yeah. That whole thing about like most people aren't afraid of failure. They're afraid of what it will take to maintain success. Critical decision making at critical times. That's what it takes, you know?
It Well, you were talking about jujitsu. I was coaching a group of entrepreneurs, and we were talking about making like these micro decisions, especially around time. And one of the guys in there was like a double gold medalist in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and he said he's talking about like he's like the mistake that like beginning jiu-jitsu, which it sounds like you're very well versed in. They're like you're trying to choke someone out, and I'm like, okay, this is a good visual. He's like, they'll make like a move with their arm like up an inch, and he goes, and that's too big. It's too big of a movement. And he said it's these micro movements. Like you might just move your hand like literally a nanometer.
Yeah, it's this. It's just the further getting the collar, right? And then it's like before you know it, you're like, oh my God, how'd that happen? I didn't even feel it, right?
Yeah. I love that you're bringing this back to it's not that like that are you a bad person that you lied? It's just knowing like when to, right? I think really good. Maybe and also counter to maybe how people would address it, but I think it's so true. I wanted to also talk a little bit about these things happening. And someone said you don't deserve that. And I had I had a text from a dear friend, Blake Hansen, when everything was going on with my son, and after he was born, and then when we had to remove his like breathing tube, and some people are like, oh, that's just so sad. Which don't get me wrong, like incredibly sad. But he had this interesting take on it. He said, "God must respect you," and I was like, well, I gotta mull that one here for a moment. And what I really dawned upon me, and this came when I was talking with like my one of my spiritual coaches, Daniel White. He was saying, he's like, he's like, how I take that is that he goes, God respects you so much that you and Jenna have brought so much love into the world that God saw to put it on your heart to allow Benny to be able to graduate. And that was such a pivotal moment that allowed me to like really transcend that didn't happen to us. That actually happened for us because in 16 days, he lived more than I had in 42 years. I mean, it's crazy. In 16 days. And by the way, couldn't talk, couldn't walk, no W-2, no net worth statement, no, state medals, no, medal of honors. And and I listened to your story, and like you had like this moment where awareness into acceptance, and that acceptance into action, and it's just like those moments that we all look for. We look for these like pivotal moments that we transcend or we transform or we catalyze or we alchemize, and so often we're like too busy trying to avoid them.
Dude, first of all, just mad respect for your ability to show up for that moment. You know, I feel that so many humans are so fixated on the doing, they can't allow for the being. And the being is not just us being, but the being is things being. The being is the way, right? Of like, you got to do more, right? It's my son. You have to do more. And it's like, dude, the being of the moment as a departure from this plane is not the end of anything, right? A soul's journey through life is here to learn from the struggle, not only the struggles that we endure, but sometimes souls are put in our lives to struggle in front of us to teach us even more, right? We can't do that unless we can be in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And it really made me, when you said that thing about your friend's text, what I wrote down is, who is respectable in God's eyes that is not respectable in their own? Who is respectable in God's eyes that is not respectable in their own?
Hmm.
And it just anchors to my morning prayer of, I love you, Ben. I love you, God. I hear you. You know, I see God inside of myself. I was forced to go to a Southern Baptist military school. I do not see God in a church. I see it in the eyes of a person begging for money. I see it in a tree, very much like Tich Nhat Hanh, right? Of like, when I look at the tree, I see the cathedral, like, um, and I see that godliness in you, of that ability to show up for that moment, endure, understand, and allow, and then to let that continually impress upon us through the rest of our days.
Yeah, and I want to bring this back to like the being. I think that it's actually the being of the human beingness is actually the umami, and you'll get this as a chef, right? There's a senses like that we can taste, right? It's the whole mouth feeling, and when you actually observe human beingness, that's like when you have like these moments. A friend of mine invited me to go on Ragbri, which is this ride across Iowa. I mean, it's incredible. You have these moments. You're biking along. It's like over the course of I think like 5, 6 days, and you're going from the west side. You dip your tire in the river, and then you go to the Mississippi side and dip your tire in at the end. And I just remember having some of these moments, not knowing any of these people, but imagine there's 50,000 people biking across the state. Yeah. And you get to a town and you get to this little town and you think it's like the Tour de France has arrived there. It's so packed that at the edge of the city limits, you have to get off your bike. And in the morning, the cities that are there are, it's like all the morning stuff. So all these food trucks, but you just, it doesn't matter where you're from, your socioeconomic status, like whether you're female, male, whatever, however you identify, right? It wasn't about race. It was about the fact is that you were doing this thing called movement, and you just had these moments. Like you'd stop in the middle of a cornfield, they'd have like this beer tent set up in the middle of, I mean, literally nowhere, and you're listening to music, but people are just being so much into the being, and you realize this is like this umami, and I think that's beauty.
It's beautiful. That's for sure. It reminds me of the whole no atheists in foxholes thing, you know? Just, you got a bunch of dumb, tough Marines getting trained up, right? And you go through combat training and everybody's got their ego, everybody's got their opinion, everybody's got their girlfriend, and everybody's got their religion, right? And a big theme of the Marine Corps is we all bleed green, right? Doesn't matter. Black, Latino, Chinese, doesn't matter. We all bleed green. And that anchors back to there's no atheists in foxholes, of going through that moment, duck and cover, mortar fire, whatever it is. P.S. Never been in combat, just trained. So I just want to clarify, I am not a combat veteran. Mad respect to people that have had to endure that, not necessarily tons of respect for what they had to do, to disagree with heavily. But the no atheists in foxholes is similar to like that vibe in the NICU, man. It's a tender, grounding place that you will never be the same from that moment, right? Everything you had preconceived prior to showing up in that moment is fucking gone. Everything that I had holding my son's hand, teaching him, just breathe, buddy, come on, like do it together. Like, and he's just like, doing the thing. I didn't know which way that was going to go. I just knew we had this moment. We still both had consciousness. We still both had human nervous system contact, right? Hand to hand. And that was it. The gravity of that, the breathing tube moment, those are where everything dissolves. And our full self is just umami bomb of humanity.
It's so true. That is like it's beautifully stated, and that's exactly what it is. Because when you're even talking about them, just brought back to like that moment, and I gotta tell you, like I've never been more present in anything in my life. I had 16 days of presence that I've never experienced before, and quite frankly, like after. I mean, it was such a level of like presence, and this is going back to like I want to talk a little bit about this ADHD and this, and I like your perspective on it. But I look at so often growing up, like that was like I had ADD, and that I remember the time it was like ADD, and if it was really bad, then you had ADHD. Now it's just all ADHD. But I like your description of it, but I feel like what was considered a weakness in high school and in school was one of the greatest gifts that allowed me to be front and center, to do the listening, to be the presence, to like experience like the moment that it was happening. And I categorize everything else that happened. And what Benny taught me was like you're either alive or you're living. There's there's very little. I call it the Benny principle, right? Like either live or you're living. So there, to your point, you're exactly right. There was me, Ben, before Benny, and then there's me after Benny. It's sort of like, before Christ, after Christ, right? In terms of like there is such a line of demarcation. Um and but it really just kickstart what really living means.
I mean, that goes to man's search for meaning, Viktor Frankl. And I was just listening to a podcast with Trevor Noah. What's next? Trevor Noah, I think he was interviewing Esther Perel, and she was both of her parents were Holocaust survivors, sole survivors of their families. Her parents then married, so like the baggage that they carried, and she talked about how there were people that there was two classifications of people that came out of the concentration camps: people that didn't die and people that were alive.
Oh,
And the people that didn't die still lived very closed off lives, rich with morbidity, peeking out from behind the curtains. And the people that were truly alive were singing on the rooftops. No in between. Binary.
it is binary. And by the way, I mean, we're talking about Holocaust, and we're talking about like, my 16-year-old son having to do that. And you're talking about your son, basically like, losing 50%. But I think that this is happening on a day-to-day basis. It just the consequences or the outcome of these micro, right? Instead of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu like 1 inch thing, it's like the little nanometer. Like these things are constantly happening and they start to compound.
Oh, it's everything's cumulative. Everything is cumulative.
I'd love for you to dive into the cumulative effect of this ADHD label, right? Because I mean, we're talking about identities, right? I mean, by the way, we all carry these identities. You just happen to have like a bunch of tattoos, some like lived life of an identity you didn't even know you necessarily had. But can you talk a little bit about how the categorization, the labeling of ADHD really impacted your journey?
So, the ADHD thing, dude, first and foremost, I think in the 80s when I was diagnosed, it was new, right? Doctors were doing the best they could. Neurologists were doing the best they could. Parents with wild ass kids were doing the best they could. P.S. Both my parents are public school teachers. So their compassion for my teachers dealing with my bullshit that they saw live on stage every day, peak, right? It was almost as it, everyone was against Team Ben. Like the neurologist is with them and the teacher says this and my parents are teachers and the principal and all these things, right? Um, I will say the thing that I am assembling around this, and I'm working on a couple of working titles for my book between the people in the hallway and managing my own mania. Basically, the subtext to it is reclassifying attention deficit disorder, right? And the way that it had been stigmatized back in the day, and the way that before HIPAA, shame was so able to be broadcast. So like, Bebenroth, did you take your medicine today? I'm like, no. get down to the nurse right now. It's like, oh, thanks for doing that in front of all the kids that already hate me. Right. Like, that was wonderful. Um, that was just, I think it was like how the old churchy people felt about rock and roll. This scary, wild thing's going to corrupt our society, right? Like, and now it turns out you look around and people with ADHD, they're the fucking entrepreneurs, they're the tech geniuses, they're like people that are, autism, Asperger's syndrome, all that stuff. I taught kids with that. It's all in that same category of, in my opinion, an evolution of the human consciousness and nervous system, responding to additional stimuli at levels that we have not seen in 20,000 years. Right. So if you think you're going to program TV and radio and movies and video games and all this crap into human consciousness and not get a response factor to all that input of new data, of course you're going to get an evolutionary response to that. Right. The ability to receive all of this information and then make it mean something. Right. So I think there's a lot of territory here, not only for entrepreneurs, but I think there's a lot of territory for parents of kids that are going through a lot. And by a lot, I mean a lot of change. And that change is not only happening inside of their brains, which is how, I don't know how you were talked to, but that's how I was talked to. Of like, oh, there's something wrong with your brain. You don't have neurotransmitters, so you can't. Right? You need to be on amphetamines twice a day because you have a brain problem. You just can't, right? And then you start reading that to yourself. And then all of a sudden I get into a restaurant setting and all the shit that I was believing from my history was now a superpower. Right? No one was telling me what I couldn't do. People were just like, "You got that whole prep list done already?" I'm like, "Yeah, what else do you need done?" Like, like how? Like, dude, I'm finally able to let it all out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've been holding this shit back my whole life. Like, so it's a stigma.
It is a stigma, and I remember, and maybe it's because of the stigma, but I just remember going to see some specialist, and they gave me like these graphs and these like exercises, and yeah, the puzzle, and no one actually said that I failed anything. So I like came home and I was like, I crushed the shit out of that.
Nailed it. Yeah. And then they're like, "Hey, we got your results back. You're dysfunctional."
Yeah, and I can't. I don't think my parents necessarily like went that far, but they're like, well, there's this medicine, dexedrine, that will, help you, and I just remember, and this is probably when I probably, in retrospect, knew I was an entrepreneur. I remember just going, this is not my truth, and so they would give me the pill, and then I just would never take it. And the only time I would take it is actually before like an actual like a football game, because I was like, oh well, this will just help me.
Works
And
for that.
yeah, it worked for. And honestly, it actually didn't, because it actually almost brought my brain to a level of calmness when I needed that like hyper focus in the chaos of like a whole bunch of like male bodies running around trying to like gain leverage on each other. And but that really set the scene, I think, for me, a lot of ways of really having a filter of someone saying something and me running it through like my filter of is like, if I'm being honest, is there any truth in what they're saying? And if there isn't, that's not my truth. And so therefore, like the pill, throw it away.
Yeah, it took me a while to get to that point. I went through a phase of like not taking my medicine, and then it was like, nope, show me your mouth, lift your tongue, like prison style, that type of shit. Um, but what I understood about it, number one, it did help me because I just didn't have the constitution to choose math over outside. I'm just a feral being, dude. And now I see that in myself, like the things I've been able to execute and do. So that helped in that regard. But I will say, And I don't know if this is non-PC, but I'll just say the first time I ever tried cocaine, I was like, "Oh my god, this is horrible. It feels like it's time to do homework." Like, I never did it again. Like, and I was like, I just spent all this money on all these beers and now I'm 100% sober and I feel like I'm supposed to be studying for a test. Like, this is how I spent all my middle school years. I can't believe you guys pay for this shit. Like, but it's weird because the ADHD brain is actually brought down a notch by stimulants, you know? And so I think there's a little bit of that reverseness of how our nervous system works, where the ADHD brain in my skull is actually enticed and excited by chaotic firefight level situations because my ability to take it all in, prioritize and execute, delegate, command, move, hunker, whatever, like most people are still in a state of panic and I've already made 6 decisions in my mind, you know? And that's the unmedicated ADHD brain, which I feel is a superpower to help us navigate the transitions of humanity's next 50 years. Dude, we're going to need crazy people like you and me.
Yeah, I heard someone actually explain it like this. There's hunter gatherer, right? We're hunter gatherer sort of like society. They said people with ADD and ADHD, they were the spotters. They're the ones that like noticed like the subtle change or trend in where it's we're able to alert people. And I was like, obviously confirmation bias in this. I'm like, yeah, okay, great. Love that. Have an identity. Um, but I think that so often people are walking around with like these stigmas, and I think that this goes back to these narratives. I mean, this is the underlying like theme across all of our conversation is there is a code running underneath, and right? And there's external code being written. There's internal like discernment and deciphering of the external that is then writing internal code. And then there's actually code. I was just talking with one of our guests who was talking about he's going through some like cool things that are deep diving into the fact that he was born almost dead with a cord wrapped around his. I mean, he basically was like, I should be dead. And that the fact is that he's never crawled, and that and like he never crawled as a kid. He was just like either laying and then to walking in essence. And so why not having like that created internal coding in him that is still reverberating? And I want to bring it back to this idea you talked about, echoes. What are the other echoes that you see, right? One of our again, not to bring it back to one of our guests said that there's do you know Joey Klein? Incredible human being. You two would get along really well. But he talked about there's the ghosts within the machine. That's how I think that's how he kind of talks about. I think what you call like the echo. What are the other echoes that you see being experienced by people?
So much external measuring right now. I mean, we're kind of in an unprecedented time in that regard of like, I want a bigger butt. Why? Well, Instagram, you know, it's like, where the fuck is that coming from? Like that type of stuff. So I think there's so much at play right now that is echoing in such a frequency uh of choice, of opting in to this thing, dude, of the doom scrolling, the you know what I mean? So that there's a lot going on right now in the human mind that I feel like is negating infinite potential by eliminating silence and calm. Every everything good comes from a place of calm. I had this vision when I was one of my journeys I did, and I saw an image of a woman trying to find a place to nurse their child. And I don't know why. My mind is hallucinatory in a sober state almost. I close my eyes, things are happening, right? That's when the cartoons start. Um but I saw this like whether you were a market hawker and had a newborn under the table, or you were in a combat zone, you were a Palestinian refugee, you were whatever you were, right? There's this moment where all Feminine energy is just seeking enough calm so their milk can drop and they can nurture and nutrient exchange and love and rock and pat. That space is the cradle of humanity. And that is impossible to achieve. You cannot do those things under duress well.
You just actually jogged something in my brain. Well, I'm gonna call him my doctor. I mean, technically, he's not a doctor, but I'm calling him my doctor because he's my body coach. He's my cellular coach. Oh yeah, it's a shout out to Reagan Archibald, East West Health. I mean, he's single handedly responsible for adding probably at least 20, 30 years onto my life.
I hope they're good.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They've been fantastic so far.
Oh, we're already counting them. I love it. I thought these were like the 80s, 90s, and hundreds that you were counting.
Yeah. No, but we were talking about testosterone, right? That's a big thing. You drive down any type of interstate and be like testosterone replacement therapy. And, I think this idea of like testosterone is like this level of like, getting jacked up and like, you're fired up and more aggressive. And he said something to me that was just absolutely sort of like a stunning little moment where no, he goes, that's not masculinity. And he goes, that's not like really testosterone. Like when you have the appropriate amount of testosterone, he goes, what ends up happening is that you bring a level of masculine energy. And how I define masculine energy is where you have focus, you have drive, and there's calmness.
Mm, tolerance.
Tolerance. And so it's so interesting to me what you just talked about in this vision is this woman who's just like waiting, like can't breastfeed because she's waiting for milk to drop because she needs like this level of calmness. And anyways, just as an ADD thought, I was like, well, that's how these puzzle pieces fit.
I almost would argue that the United States would benefit from testosterone abatement therapy right now. There's so much toxic masculinity and it's making all masculinity seem toxic. I get into this with my wife frequently. Culture index, we're both daredevils. I'm a 7, she's an 8. It's a hot household. We are passionate people, right? Not hot in an argumentative way, hot in a drive way, right? We do shit. We do hard things. We face the music. We have uncomfortable conversations. And something I'm frequently having to revisit with her is, honey, not all masculinity is toxic. You know what I mean? Like there is a role, and that providership, that protectorship, yeah, those can be kind of seen as sort of aggressive. My healer, Todd Livingood, real name, uh, been working with him for 15 years. Amazing dude, suffered greatly. Martial arts fighter his whole life, became an addict, overdosed on fentanyl, died. Had both hips replaced, 100% sober, fully vested in jailhouse work of helping guys in prisons get some healing. Like, amazing human being, been through the fucking ringer. He says, you're never making more progress in life than when you're laughing or crying. And oftentimes the most progress is made is when you're doing both. And he'll often revisit the comment of, you want to be a warrior in a garden, my friend, a warrior in a garden. And that is to say, a person that has the ability to know they have lethal components and devices, and knowing when they are appropriate to be used. We are reading with the sword by our side, right? We are not waving the sword around the garden, cutting down weeds.
Yeah. That's called a lawnmower.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's a funny thing, testosterone, and how it's, I feel, being manipulated in the media of like through these like very surface level cut abs advertisements and not taking anywhere into account, is that going to help you parent a 15-year-old daughter through a tough moment? Because that person needs a father figure that's understanding, calm, patient, tender, willing to listen, right? Someone needs advice. And certainly if you give it in a super masculine tone, it's not going to resonate, not going to be heard, right? So like Where is masculinity serving us and where is it not serving us right now? That's a territory, right?
Yeah, when I got my testosterone measured, like, by normal terms, they were like, "Yep, you're normal." And, but by in terms of, like, optimization, he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "You're low." And he's like, "Let me guess." And Jenna was on the call with me. He goes, "Is he crabby? Is he kinda like a old man, old woman, sort of crotchety?" And she goes, kind of the look, as a spouse can have is like, the answer's in the face. And she's like, "Yeah." And what's interesting as I right-sided that in my body and actually, re-got my body producing to where it needs to be, um, what went away? When you're talking about your 15-year-old daughter, what went away is the crotchety. What showed up was empathetic, real men cry, supportive, hey, when I'm out in LA and it's like 8:30 here and she is experiencing, some emotional distress, like she's reaching out to me, like moments. And I think those are just the beautiful things. It's just it's pretty amazing.
We just did a sound bath on the farm with my leadership team and a bunch of new employees.
Can you explain for the audience what a sound bath is?
Yeah. So a bunch of gongs, bunch of chakra qigong bowls and stuff like that. Uh, Basically, we are mostly water. Sound is energy waves, travels through the air, really travels through water, a la whale codes, right? Dolphin speak, that type of stuff. So work with this energy worker, Susie Wu, out of Western New York. We have a house up in the Ellicottville area. And she's just a very powerful woman. I brought her to town. We did sound bath for 20 people. It's about an hour and a half experience. Plays all these gongs, all these bowls while speaking some kind of gibberish, which called light language, and also some things about like remembering that you're infinite energy. Remember when you were a whale, right? Like kind of abstract thinking of like your life is an energetic frequency that has been traveling through the universe for millennia, right? You're not just here now. You were somewhere before here, you'll be somewhere after here. And we can get into like non spiritual ways to evaluate that, right? But point being, maybe three of the people had done some stuff like this before. Several new people in the company that don't really know me that well yet, don't know the team that well yet, and certainly had not done something like this yet.
Yeah. Welcome to the team.
Yeah, they dealt with some stuff they did not plan on dealing with. And she's so intuitive. Like one of my employees had abdominal surgery last year, almost died. And she asked the room, she's like, "Does anybody have any pain that wasn't here before the sound bath?" And this person's like, "Yeah, I do right here." And she was like, "Let me do some energy work on you really quickly." And she's like, "Okay." And she's like, "You had a laceration across your abdomen that crossed over multiple lives." And like literally never met this person before. And like people in the room start crying. And I had to kind of do the Patrick Lencioni thing, right? Of like leaders go first. So I just jumped on it, got up, watery eyes, like, okay. I had heart stuff going on, like, because she was asking, like, did anybody else feel anything? And it was just kind of quiet and uneasy. And it was that thing of going first with watery eyes and owning my experience and like, oh, the left quadrant of my heart was vibrating for about 25 minutes there. And then this wave of energy, and my hands started tingling and everything. It normalized an abstract experience. And as soon as I did that, bam, 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 start going around the room, right? Even my big burly COO with all sleeved out with tattoos and everything, he just gets up and he's like, I went somewhere. And it's that thing of like vulnerability, emotional intelligence, these types of like water moving moments. Nothing carries energy faster than water. Tears, right, are the number one energy carrying device in the body. Holding back tears, dude, bad idea, right? Bad idea. Let it rip, you know? And that idea of like as I just was counseling one of my team members today, I even told him, I was like, dude, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you stay here or not. It doesn't matter if this job works out for you. What matters is that you know there's more for you somewhere, right? And it's inside of this moment, how you're choosing to show up for this moment, dude. That's all I really want to communicate to people that work here right now. We're creating lifelong moments for people at their weddings and their anniversaries and nonprofit fundraisers, sure, all that stuff. But most importantly, we have internal guests. They show up every day. They're the most important people in my world. They're the team. And the team needs to know when the team is up and the team is down and how to rally around each other. It's a similar vibe in a family. It's every day is not great just because you have kids, right? And that space of lean into what you feel when you walk into a room, lean into what you feel when you encounter an employee that's having a tough time. I guarantee there's more going on behind the scenes than you have any idea about, you know? Tuning into that, that's the human beingness that I aspire to create inside of my business.
I love that. I love that. Ben, I want to, as we kind of tie this all together here, is, the podcast is a Max Life, right? Max Life with Ben Laws. How would you define a Max Life?
I can only define a max life for myself because I'm the only person that I've truly ever known. I've heard of other people, I've seen other people, but I truly only know one, and it's me. So a max life for me is a life of connection. It's a life of space and thoughtfulness. It's a life of composure and contribution. And it's a life that I can feel at the end of it, no matter what time that finds me, was well spent. It's the difference between money wasted and well spent, right? And that's what I would say is I want to use it up.
Yep. Energy wasted versus energy well spent. Yeah. What's crazy about all of that is that the end in mind in all of that is the natural outcomes, is that, like, worst case scenario, you fail in all of that and your headstone goes, beloved father, beloved partner, incredible friend, friend of the community.
Very much. I would end one last point in there, and it is my life mission. And I've kind of came to this over the years, but I am here to change how people connect with the earth. I do that by changing how people connect with food and each other. So I would want a nod towards earth stewardship on that headstone.
Yes. Showed God's umami one bite at a time.
Oh, come on now. I have no words tattooed on me, but that might be it.
I love it. You're welcome. You're welcome. Hey, Ben, I want to say thank you for being on the podcast. I know that there's going to be a ton of people wanting to know. I mean, you talked about, hey, maybe got some books coming out, but, like, where can they find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they sign up for, like, more Ben?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I try to keep up with Instagram, but I just don't care about it that much. Spiceheadquarters.com is our website. My company is Spice Hospitality Group. I have Booms Pizza, Spice Catering Company, Spice Field Kitchen, our nonprofit. We teach agriculture, culinary, and nutrition skills inside of a STEM vertical. We've been doing that for about 7 years. 140 lessons available online if you want to, if you're a homeschooler or you got kids or you're a teacher, you can go on the Thinkific platform, download all that stuff, food miles, exercises, connectivity to garden workshops. And I would say, where can you really find me? You can find me on the farm, man, in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park outside of Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I live. That's where I love, and that's where I raised my family.
That's incredible. Ben, one of the things I like to do as tradition is to allow the guests to do a send off. What's the word, the phrase, the thought, the ideal, the principle that you want to echo into people's hearts and minds?
Oh, man. All right. I'm going to give a Mark Twain quote to send them off, actually. Two best days of your life, the day that you're born and the day you figure out why.
Ooh, I love that. Ben, thank you. I gotta tell you, it's an hour and 45 minutes has literally blown by in a blink of an eye. I want to say thank you. Thank you for your generosity of sharing your vulnerableness and also sharing your experiences in such vivid detail that I feel like I have to imagine that you as a chef are incredible because your words are plated so beautifully. I can only imagine that when you actually put the umami that you've been put here to do to allow people to have that connection, it's just got to be incredible. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate you. When I introduced this concept to my team of why the door says, please do not disturb recording in progress, um, I only talk about you in the context of you forming your nonprofit to afford people that are enduring a life-changing moment to spend more time inside of it, in the NICU space, right? My sister-in-law is a NICU nurse. So I don't know what you've achieved. I don't know what your bank account balance is, and I don't know what your golf score is, and I really don't give a shit. I just wanted to say, like, that was so empowering and impactful to me when Alex introduced you to like me to you. That's kind of how he teed you up. He's like, "Oh yeah, successful financial manager, this and that, but this is what really happened. This is what he really did." And I was just like, "I'm about it. I want to talk to this dude." Like, so just thank you for doing that, man. That's so important to people that you will probably never meet.
Yeah. Well, people like your sister-in-law are angels, and anyone here, just my soft plug. If you're NICU nurse, or you are married to a NICU nurse, or you know NICU nurse, like give them a hug. Uh, they do things that no one will ever see, but that ripple for generations. So again, just soft plug. If you want to know what Ben is talking about, head on over to 16days.org. You can read kind of all about what Benny's Ripple is and the waves that we're creating there. So, Ben, thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for being here. And just thanks for an incredible conversation.
Namaste, brother. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more MaxLife.